Alice White was born Alva Violet White in August 1904, but insisted later she was born in August 1906 or 1907. Raised by her maternal grandparents who owned a fruit business, she attended schools in Madison and East Orange, New Jersey. Her mother had died when she was a child, and it doesn't seem her father was involved in her life at all. The petite, red-haired spitfire of a woman made 36 films between 1927 and 1949, including Gentlemen Prefer Blondes in 1928 and Flamingo Road alongside Joan Crawford in 1949. But White had a temper and was described as bubbly but temperamental. In his book, Silent Films, 1877 through 1996, A Critical Guide to 646 Movies, Robert Klepper wrote, "Some critics have said that Miss White was a second-string Clara Bow. In actuality, Miss White had her own type of charm and was a delightful actress in her own unique way. Whereas Clara Bow played the quintessential flaming red-headed flapper, Alice White was more of a bubbly, vivacious blonde." You can watch some Clara Bow music videos on this channel. A glamour girl in the late 1920s and early 1930s with huge eyes and drawn-on eyebrows and a messy blonde bob, White gained notoriety in at least two stormy marriages and one of the longest on-again, off-again romances in Hollywood history. She took a secretarial course at Hollywood High School when her grandparents moved there in her youth, potentially to follow the fruit season. After leaving school, she became a secretary and script girl, which included lots of typing for director Joseph von Sternberg. She also worked as a switchboard operator at the Hollywood Writers Club. After clashing with von Sternberg, who said she was not serious enough, which White interpreted as being too sexy, she left to work for Charlie Chaplin. Chaplin decided before long to place her in front of the camera, and you can learn more about Chaplin and Pepe Lederer in that video on this channel. When White was asked to stand in for a star, Chaplin saw her and told her to keep trying. "I was so stubby and fat and pink-looking that everybody there called me Peter Rabbit," Alice White said. "I had no thought of becoming a movie actress," she recalled in 1958. One day, the still cameraman had a new lens he wanted to test, and he said, "Peter Rabbit, how about posing for me?" So I put on an act with gestures, like I thought movie actresses did, and he snapped the shutter. The pictures turned out fine. When Mr. Chaplin saw them, he said, "Peter Rabbit, you ought to go into the movies." Her first screen tests were bad, but an agent believed there was some promise in the pert, overdressed girl. He took her to First National Studios, where she was given a bit part in The Sea Tiger of 1927. Her performance impressed no one at the studio, but audiences wanted to see more of her, and her career started where she was cast as gold diggers or flappers. White was 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 138 pounds when she made The Sea Tiger. After seeing herself on film, she brought her weight down to 100 pounds. First National gave her a contract, and after appearing in several minor roles, she was loaned to Paramount for a part in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. You can learn more about Anita Loos, author of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, on this channel. Studio executives discovered White had brains as well as beauty, and a toughness that belied her stature. She often defied convention. Director Mervyn Leroy of Showgirl in Hollywood and White are often romantically linked by Hollywood historians, with Richard Barrios mentioning Leroy's off-screen interest in White. Eve Golden wrote that Leroy next turned his interests to Ginger Rogers after White, and you can learn about Ginger Rogers on this channel, while Hollywood whispered that White had slept her way to success. By the late 1920s, there was the encroaching reality that flappers were becoming old hat, and the smooth, ladylike demeanor of the 1930s woman was creeping in. It's unknown whether Alice White's nude photos hurt or helped her career in the long run. Oberpeak noted the recent departures of First National stars Corinne Griffith, Colleen Moore, who you can learn about on this channel, and Billy Dove. If it weren't for the glamorous presence of Marilyn Miller, First National Studios would look like an abandoned beehive, she wrote. And Alice, one of First National's top remaining draws, likely remained because of the bottom line. She was making $150 per week there, about $2,500 in today's value. Later on in the decade, White reflected upon the hard time she gave her bosses and her fall from grace, explaining, "I was a star and I was paid like a bit player and simply couldn't keep up the front that was necessary." After White's star vehicle character Dixie Duggan turns temperamental, fellow character Jimmy tells her, "Don't kid yourself, honey. Motion picture producers are businessmen. Making motion pictures is their business, not arguing with temperamental dames." The line didn't hit home for Dixie, and it didn't do much for Alice either. Alice White's performance as Dixie Duggan in Showgirl and Showgirl in Hollywood consists a lot of her rolling her eyes from one side to another and botching the delivery of the better portion of her lines. Her charm is playful and somewhat basic. She speaks slowly, coating each word with a youthful naughtiness. Her tone varies very little and almost always suggests sexual things. Colleen Moore's girlishness helps make the flapper of the 1920s, and White's adulthood does as well. But Alice White can't turn this feature off. She is always herself on screen. But unlike Louise Brooks, who was a pure hedonist in real life, White is in many ways just a girl who wanted to be on the big screen. This infects every line, even her scenes with other women, mostly limited to those with former silent star Blanche Sweet in Showgirl in Hollywood, who easily rides away with every scene they appear in together, likely in part due to Blanche Sweet's training under D.W. Griffith. You can learn more about Blanche on this channel. Alice wisecracks with appeal to much better effect with her male co-stars of Showgirl in Hollywood. In this we see that the studios missed out on the changeling that is Alice White. She could have been a tough-talking dame, a gangster moll, something more than the singing, dancing ingenue she was repeatedly typecast as. Very aware of the camera, White seems indifferent to it and her audience. A somewhat mysterious vocalist named Belle Mann is credited with Alice's songs in the original Showgirl, and it's possible Mann was back for the same duties in Showgirl in Hollywood as well. Despite being filmed in Technicolor, Showgirl in Hollywood's Technicolor version is missing. If it were to be found, White's reputation would probably be buoyed a bit. White's early films included Showgirl of 1928, which had Vitaphone musical accompaniment but no dialogue, and its musical sequel Showgirl in Hollywood of 1930, both released by Warner Brothers and both based on novels by J.P. McAvoy. In these two films, White appears as Dixie Dugan. In October 1929, McAvoy started the comic strip Dixie Dugan, with the character Dixie having a helmet hairstyle and appearance similar to actress Louise Brooks or Colleen Moore, not Alice White. White also used the services of Hollywood beauty sculptor Sylvia of Hollywood during this time to stay in shape. Sylvia Ulbeck of Hollywood was a Norwegian immigrant who recommended a strict schedule of massage, diet, and exercise to Hollywood actors and actresses. Her practices included whacking actresses between the shoulder blades to achieve rounded shoulders. In 1932, Sylvia exposed the foibles of the Hollywood system and her clientele in the book Hollywood Undressed, Observations of Sylvia as Noted by Her Secretary of 1931, which was republished in 2007. Although said to be penned by Sylvia's secretary, the book, full of gossip and crude vernacular, was ghost-written by newspaper reporter and screenwriter James Whittaker, and it included gossip about White, which did not help her career decline in the 1930s. White was featured in The Girl from Woolworth's of 1929, having the role of a singing clerk in the music department of a Woolworth store. Karen Plunkett Powell wrote in her book, Remembering Woolworths, that the First National Pictures produced the 60-minute musical as a showcase for the up-and-coming actress Alice White. During this time, she was pictured alongside Joan Crawford and Jean Harlow, who were considered her contemporaries. But her career would not be nearly as illustrious. In her seventh film, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes of 1928, made for Paramount, she finally received a leading role. This got her a real contract with First National, who decided they needed an it girl of their own. The choice fell on Alice, who had much of Clara Bow's youthful pep, but perhaps a little less of the it. However, Alice's career didn't really take off in the silent world, perhaps due to her lack of acting ability, but she definitely has something on screen. When Warner Brothers bought the control of First National in September 1928, they kept Alice and decided to make her a talkie star. Her 15th picture, Hot Stuff of 1929, was part talkie, and Alice could talk, and the 16th, Broadway Babies, became her first 100% talkie. Alice White finally found the missing part of her jigsaw puzzle by billing herself as a singing, dancing flapper. As Clara Bow's star fell with the advent of the talkies and her soft, unsure voice, Alice White's star started to rise. She could sing and dance. White met Sidney Bartlett, a Ukrainian-born Jewish stage actor trying to break into films in 1929. Their romance rocked Hollywood as they traveled across the country together, sometimes proclaiming and sometimes denying that they were engaged, leading to one of the longest romances in Hollywood history. Complicating the matter was White's relationship with John Warburton, a British actor also known as Jack. White and Warburton reportedly had a love affair that ended when he beat her so badly she required cosmetic surgery. A grand jury in Los Angeles decided not to charge Bartlett or White. However, the bad publicity hurt White's career despite her being the victim. In 1933, Warburton had to get involved legally because a grand jury indicted two men for beating and robbing him in revenge for his alleged beating of Alice. She testified that an argument at a party led to Warburton's battery, which resulted in her spending 4 days in bed to recover due to swollen eyes and a broken nose. Warburton grabbed White by her hair and sat on her outside her own house after he followed her home from a party. The newspapers gossiped that White had mob connections, but it was Sidney Bartlett who procured Martin Block and Russell Brown to beat Warburton to a pulp. Bartlett refused to testify, and Block and Brown were known robbers. Warburton would go on to marry 5 times, and you can catch him in a few episodes of Perry Mason. Bartlett, 4 years White's senior, had a violent streak as well. He hit Germans in the face at nightclubs convinced they were Nazis without any provocation. He hosted Sunday barbecues and was married twice after his divorce from White. In the 1940s, he continued writing and producing films, hell-bent on whitewashing World War II into a brave struggle for freedom from fascism. He also produced a puff piece on the communist Che Guevara, Che, in 1969. He died in 1978. After 4 or 8 years, depending on who you ask, Bartlett and White were wed at a colorful ceremony in Magdalena, in the Mexican state of Sonora. If their engagement was one of the longest in Hollywood history, the honeymoon was one of the shortest. Less than 24 hours after they said their vows, White was recalled to Hollywood to begin work on a new film. Bartlett stayed behind to work on a cattle roundup. In this, their relationship reflected the love between Clara Bow and her cowboy husband Rex Bell, and they were married in 1931. The dynamic reflects that the West was still wild back in the 1930s, and cowboys, that backbone of American civilization, still roamed. White and Bartlett parted 18 months after they were married, and in 1937, White told a divorce court she left Bartlett after she discovered that while she was away on a personal appearance tour, he had other women living with him at their home. She received $65 weekly in alimony from Bartlett for the rest of her life. She later married Columbia studio writer Jack Roberts in a secret ceremony in Kingman, Arizona in 1941. That marriage ended in divorce in 1949. She told the divorce court Robert called her vile names, threw things around, and carried on with other women. The judge ordered Roberts to pay her 30% of his earnings for 3 years, but Roberts refused and spent 2 days in county jail before giving the court a statement of his earnings. It was 6 more years before White obtained a final divorce decree from Roberts. The actress said she held out for the final decree because Roberts did not comply with the financial terms of the settlement. White's career of glamour drew to a close after her second marriage ended. She bought a home in the Hollywood Hills and lived there until her death in 1983. She had serious romances with aviator Richard Virgil Grace, who was married, and actor Donald Keith. Richard Virgil Grace, born in October 1898, dying in June 1965, was known as Dick Grace, and he was an American stunt pilot who specialized in crashing planes for films. Films that he appeared in include Sky Bride, The Lost Squadron, Lilac Time, and the first Best Picture Oscar winner, Wings. He served in both World Wars, bombing Germany as a B-17 Flying Fortress co-pilot with the 486th Bombardment Group. After the Second World War, he operated a charter business in South America. He was married to Christine Frances Malmstrom, a stage actress who appeared in Abby's Irish Rose. He was the author of several books, including Squadron of Death, Crash Pilot, I Am Still Alive, and Visibility Unlimited. He sustained a serious neck injury when he fell out of the cockpit during the filming of Wings, but he made a full recovery and was one of the few stunt pilots of Hollywood who died of natural causes. Back in 1931, White took a break from making movies. The studio claimed she was unhappy with her salary and had become difficult to work with. She asked for a release from her contract after 4 years. I earned $150 a week, she once recalled. I needed $1,500 to keep my end of the parade. I was a star, and I was paid like a bit player. She got into an argument with a movie executive who has remained unnamed over money, and her name quickly vanished from theater marquees. After 10 months in vaudeville, she returned to Hollywood and resumed her film work, appearing in such films as Employee's Entrance, Picture Snatcher, and Luxury Liner. I never made a great deal of money, and I lost a lot on the stock market, but I'm not destitute, she recalled in 1958. In her 50s, she was still performing, making an occasional television appearance. She was hurt that many of her old movie friends had forgotten her, but she wasn't bitter. "Skip the hearts and flowers," she said in 1958. "Show business is my racket. I was brought up in it." In that same 1958 interview, Miss White said, "I wasn't a real madcap. I just married the wrong guys, 3 of 'em. Now it seems like one big dream." Who was the third guy she married? For many years, she lived with musician William Hinshaw. 12 years her junior, he was a world-class musician in the French horn, having played first horn with the Los Angeles and Kansas City, Missouri Symphony Orchestras and the Fox and Warner Brothers movie studios. He was married 3 times before living with White, his third marriage occurring in 1952, and so there appears to have been some overlap. With her movie star days behind her, she went back to work as a secretary. In 1957, she fell off a ladder and landed on a pair of scissors. The accident left her blinded for several months. When she recovered, she was offered a role on an episode of the Ann Sothern Show of 1958. This was her final acting appearance. As she grew older, she stayed out of the spotlight but continued to answer fan mail she received from around the world. A superior court judge held her in contempt of court in 1950, along with her estranged second husband, Robert's musician William Hinshaw, and his estranged wife, Barbara. The judge threatened to throw all of them in jail unless they ironed out their mate swapping problems on their own. After her 1938 divorce from Bartlett, Miss White placed a gold band, which she called a divorce ring, with liberty and freedom engraved on it, on the little finger of her left hand. She died on February 19, 1983, after suffering a stroke. She had no children and left no immediate survivors. What do you think of Alice White?